Today we're out here in the forest taking a look at the 2016 Chevy Malibu. Now this particular model is the hybrid model, but we'll also be talking about the base 1.6-liter turbo and the 2-liter turbocharged Malibu as well. We will also be talking about the 2017 Malibu because not a whole lot is expected to change. The reason for that, of course, is that the 2016 Malibu is completely new, and generally speaking, the year after a brand new model debuts, all they really change are a few color options, and they may tweak a few of the options that are bundled into certain option packages. The front end of the Malibu is instantly recognizable as a Chevy. There's a little bit of Camaro and a little bit of Impala going on in the front. We have a fairly small Chevy logo, which is a little bit surprising, but that's mainly because they divorced the grille into these two separate sections. Projector beam headlamps right over here, LED daytime running lamp strips, and kind of an interesting twist, these actually turn off when you do turn on the turn signal. We also have little tiny Chevy logos right here integrated into the headlamp modules. At a hair under 194 inches long, the Malibu is one of the largest entries in its segment. It's also one of the widest entries, giving us a little bit more room across the front and across the back than you'll find in some of the smaller entries, most notably the Subaru Legacy or the Chrysler 200. The Chrysler 200 is nearly this long, but it is considerably narrower, and that's really obvious right back here in the rear seat. Some of you may be wondering why Chevy would make a mid-size sedan that is nearly as long as a full-size Toyota Avalon. The reason, of course, is that the Chevy Impala is significantly longer than this. The length of the Malibu is very obvious right here in the rear door area, because we have a roofline that appears to be very coupe-like, very much like we see in the Chrysler 200 and the Ford Fusion, but because this vehicle is longer than the 200 and Ford Fusion, we have about the same kind of rear seat headroom that you find in a Honda Accord, even though we still have this sleek profile. The Malibu gets General Motors' latest side view mirror design. It's quite a bit longer than you see in some of the cars in this segment, have this sleek attachment to the car and an integrated turn signal. Another nice touch on the side is that we actually have a button on the rear handle. This is for the keyless entry system. A lot of cars in the mid-size sedan category only put the sensors for keyless entry on the front doors. The Malibu puts them on all four if you get that option. Chevrolet seems to prefer a very clean and simple rear end style, and that's definitely what's going on here. We have an integrated spoiler lid into the trunk. You can see that actually bumps up there a little bit. We have large tail lamp modules that continue from the body onto the trunk lid itself, although the turn signal is amber. Because we're driving the hybrid model, we don't have any visible exhaust tips at the rear. Under the hood, we find an engine lineup that's very different from the competition because this starts with a brand new 1.5-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. It produces 160 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque, which is a little bit less power but a little bit more torque than we see in most of the base entries in this segment. That engine is mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission only, and it will give you about 27 miles per gallon in the city, 37 on the highway. Then there's a 2-liter turbocharged engine available in the 2LT and the Premier trim that produces 250 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. Those power figures are very similar to what we see in the Hyundai and the Kia turbocharged engines. Opting for the larger turbocharged engine, of course, reduces your fuel economy, but it significantly improves performance. And performance in that 2-liter turbo engine is a little bit higher than we see in the other 2-liter turbos in this segment because it's mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission. That makes this the first entry in this mainstream mid-size segment to use an 8-speed. An interesting twist is that at the moment, General Motors is actually buying the 8-speed automatic transmission from Aisin. That's the same company that makes transmissions for Toyota, Lexus, Volvo, and Mini. The highest fuel economy in the Malibu is going to be in the hybrid model that we're taking a look at right here. This combines a 1.8-liter 4-cylinder engine that produces 124 horsepower with a hybrid transaxle related to what we see in the Chevy Volt. The result is a combined 182 horsepower. This supposedly will get you 47 miles per gallon in the city and 46 on the highway, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. The hybrid system that we see under this hood is very closely related to the hybrid system that we see in the Chevrolet Volt. The biggest difference, of course, is that this battery is significantly smaller. It's located in the trunk of the Malibu, and it's about 1/10 the size that we see in the Chevy Volt. It also uses the battery in a very different manner. In addition to the battery pack being different, the internals of the transaxle are also different. We don't have the one-way clutch that we see in the Chevy Volt, and the motors themselves are a little bit different as well. The reason the internals of the hybrid system are different between the Malibu and the Volt is because the missions of the cars are different. The Chevy Volt is designed to give you up to 50 miles of EV-only range, and depending on your commute, you may not actually use any gas in your weekly routine. Then you have that gas tank to be used for long car trips or whenever you can't effectively charge the vehicle. It's always there, sort of as the backup plan. The Malibu, on the other hand, is a traditional gasoline-electric hybrid, and this drives very much like the Ford Fusion Hybrid or the Toyota Camry Hybrid or even the Toyota Prius Hybrid. Part of the reason for that, of course, is that the design of this hybrid system is actually more similar to what we see in the Toyota Prius and Ford Fusion hybrids than what we see in the Kia Optima hybrid or the Hyundai Sonata hybrid. Front seat comfort comes in at 9 out of 10 points. These are some of the most comfortable seats in this segment, although we don't have the 4-way adjustable lumbar support that we do find in some of the entries. I would say that these seats are very comparable to the Nissan Altima seats, which are some of the most comfortable in this segment. We also have a standard tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion. This makes it a lot easier for shorter or taller drivers to find an ideal driving position. Taller drivers will also appreciate the fact that we have about an inch more legroom and about an inch more headroom than you'll find in the Toyota Camry. The rear seat compartment scores 8 out of 10 points. You'll notice I have about 3 inches of legroom left, even though the front seat is in a fairly reclined position. The reason for that is that we have about 1 inch less headroom than you'll find in the Toyota Camry, and it's all down to the swoopy side profile that we find in this vehicle. However, this is significantly more headroom than you'll see in something like a Chrysler 200. Scooting over to the middle seat, we instantly notice that we have a wider rear bench seat than we find in the Chrysler 200 or the Subaru Legacy. Those are a little bit on the narrow side for this segment. Moving over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat was adjusted for a 6'5" passenger. I still have about 2.5 to 3 inches of legroom left there, although again, headroom is a little bit limited in the rear. Thanks to the Malibu's generous width, we have a large armrest with 2 cup holders right between the seats. Depending on the trim level you get, rear passengers can also have a 12-volt power outlet, 120-volt power outlet, and 2 USB charging ports. Although we are driving the hybrid Malibu, we still have a trunk pass-through, and this is larger than we see in the Toyota Camry or most mid-size sedan hybrids. It means you still could put IKEA furniture from the trunk all the way into the vehicle. When it comes to cargo capacity, both turbocharged models have just under 16 cubic feet of storage space, which is fairly average for this segment. If you opt for the hybrid model that we're testing, that drops down to 11.6 because, of course, the battery has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is right back here at the back of the trunk. That still means, however, we can put 22 and 24-inch roller bags into the trunk in this position. You can also put them up in this position and still close the trunk lid. However, this trunk is not quite deep enough for you to put them in this upright position like you can do in something like the Nissan Altima. In case you're wondering, there are actually 2 batteries back here because the 12-volt battery for the car is lurking right here behind this cargo panel in the trunk. Unlike the other versions of the Malibu, the hybrid model does not have a spare tire under the cargo area load floor. But because the vehicle was designed to accommodate a spare tire, we still have that spare tire well under the floor, and you can use that for additional storage space. When it comes to our exclusive trunk comfort index, the Malibu gains points for having this very large and practical trunk pass-through, which is something of a rarity when it comes to hybrids. However, I wish that someone would actually put the hybrid battery pack down there in the spare tire well completely, especially if they're not going to actually give you a spare tire. I do have to deduct points for the no spare tire, as well as no helper handle to help you close this trunk lid that leaves you to paw on the painted exterior surface. When you first get inside the Malibu, it's obvious that General Motors is spending a little bit more time on their mainstream cars' interiors than they were before. We have fewer hard plastics and just a better general feeling overall than the last Malibu. Up front, we have 2-way adjustable headrests and fixed height seat belts for the driver and the front passenger. Our model is the hybrid model with the optional leather. This is sort of a reddish brown color. The two-tone theme is continued on the front doors, where we find hard plastics lower on the doors. This entire brown section is a soft touch material, very similar to what we see on the seats. And then this upper portion of the door and sort of this little triangle area is kind of an interesting touch because it is actually still a hard plastic, but it has sort of a rubbery coating on it that makes it feel a little bit more premium than traditional hard injection molded plastics. Moving over to the dashboard, we find more of that same plastic that we found on top of the door right over there, again with that somewhat rubbery touch. Then we have stitched pleather pieces right here in our model, matching the seats again. More hard plastics below that. And then we find a moderately sized glove compartment. It is one of the bin style. I was able to fit a small tablet computer inside. Although base models of the Malibu do not get a touchscreen infotainment system, most of the vehicles you'll see on the dealer lots will have one because only one step up the trim ladder makes the 7-inch version of this screen standard. Our model also has a center channel speaker up there, and then we have 2 large air vents on either side of the infotainment screen. Both touchscreen infotainment systems fully support Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, making the Malibu one of the vehicles that has the lowest MSRP in order to get that particular feature. Because we're in the hybrid model, we have a little energy screens where you can see where the power is flowing. You can also click over to the info screen and see our fuel consumption history. We have a home button, forward, backward, and a back button, volume and power knob button right below that. This software is very closely related to what we see in the Cadillac CUE system, and very much like Cadillac CUE, it uses a capacitive rather than a resistive touchscreen, so interacting with this screen is going to be a little bit more familiar to iPad or Android tablet users. Our model has the optional dual zone climate control and the heated seats. Ventilated seats are also available in the top and Premier trim. Working our way down from that, we have a storage cubby right here, 2 USB inputs, auxiliary input, and a 12-volt power outlet right under this overhang. If you're counting USB ports, we have 4 in this vehicle total. These 2 right here, which do interact with that infotainment and navigation system as sources, and then the 2 charge-only ports in the back seat. We have a traditional console shifter, drive, and then low all the way down. In the hybrid model, you use these buttons to toggle between L1 and L2, which affects the way the regenerative braking works in the vehicle. Parking sensor enabled disable button right over here, and a stability traction control button right next to it. 2 very large cup holders, and an electric parking brake control. Between the front seats, we have a softly padded center armrest. If I flip that up out of the way, we have access to a large storage cubby right there. We also can see that we have a rubbery slot to put your cell phone in. You can see how far down in there they go. Helps hold it into position to keep it from sliding around the dash. Because we're in the hybrid trim, we have a power gauge on the left side of the instrument cluster instead of a tachometer. This is the regenerative braking section right over here in the green. 0 means that the car is on, but it's not really using any power or regenerating any power. And then it goes all the way on over there to that top end of the yellow section if you're using maximum power. In between the speedometer and the tachometer, we have a color multifunction display that gives us things like our trip computer, fuel economy, tire pressure, oil life, whatever the hybrid system is doing. We can also control the infotainment and navigation system and actually browse media devices with this same display. The multifunction display is controlled via this 4-way joystick with enter button on the right side of the steering wheel. This is also where you'll find the voice command button, phone hang up pickup button, and then on the left side of the steering wheel we find the controls for our standard cruise control, the collision warning system right here. You can actually adjust the collision following distance, and the lane keeping assistance button. You notice we don't have track forward, backward, or volume buttons on the front of the steering wheel. Those are actually on the back. We have up, down on the right side, and then track forward, backward on the left. The steering wheel is one of General Motors' latest designs. Ours is leather wrapped because we're in one of the top end trims. We have 3 spokes and a slim airbag in the center. The curb weight of a vehicle absolutely defines the way the vehicle behaves out on the road, and the Malibu is now one of the lightest entries in this segment. The lightest curb weight Malibu is 3,086 pounds, and this is the heaviest Malibu at just over 3,400 pounds. Not only is this one of the lightest hybrid sedans available, but the 2-liter turbocharged vehicle also has a very light curb weight for something that gets 250 horsepower under the hood. This is about 300 pounds lighter than the outgoing Chevy Malibu and significantly lighter than the average entry in this segment. That certainly helps out acceleration. 0 to 60 in the 2-liter turbocharged model is the quickest at 6.2 seconds 0 to 60, making it one of the fastest entries in this segment. You can thank not only that turbocharged engine and the light curb weight, but also the brand new 8-speed automatic transmission. The 0 to 60 time in the 1.5-liter turbocharged model is the slowest at 8.5 seconds 0 to 60. This hybrid model came in at 8 seconds even. This is a little bit slower than the average hybrid entry in this segment. Something like a Ford Fusion hybrid, the Honda Accord hybrid, or the Toyota Camry hybrid, they will go 0 to 60 a little bit faster, primarily because they use more powerful engines under the hood. This does use that 1.8-liter Atkinson cycle engine, which is a little less powerful than the competition, and the combined power ratings of this drivetrain are a little bit lower than we see, especially in the Ford Fusion. When it comes to braking, we stop from 60 to 0 in 126 feet in this hybrid model. Again, keep in mind this is the heaviest version. Thanks again to the light curb weight, a dealer-provided 1.5-liter turbocharged model went from 60 to 0 in 128 feet, which is very good for the base entry in this segment. The light curb weight obviously helps out handling, but the general suspension design of the Malibu is also excellent when it comes to corner carving. This is surprisingly agile for a hybrid vehicle in this segment. This easily blows something like the Toyota Camry out of the water. Even the Honda Accord hybrid doesn't feel quite as precise as the Malibu. Now on the downside, the steering is not as engaging as something like a Mazda 6 or the Honda Accord. We get a little bit more steering feel in those particular vehicles, although the steering is very accurate. Although the Malibu gives up the handling feel crown to the Mazda 6, comparable versions of the Malibu actually hold the road better. Oddly enough, the Malibu reminds me of the Audi A3, which is one of the best handling front-wheel drive sedans in America. Interestingly enough, certain versions of the Malibu may actually be lighter than a comparable Audi A3. Body roll and tip and dive are very well controlled in the Malibu, very much like we see in the Mazda 6. On the downside, however, the ride takes a toll, and I'm going to have to give the ride a B- in this model. As I frequently say, ride and handling tend to be two ends of the teeter-totter, so when you affect one, it definitely affects the other. The change in the general character of the Malibu's ride is most noticeable out here on a gravel road, where this is definitely firmer than the previous generation Malibu. It definitely has a more European feel to it. This is not as firm, however, as certain versions of the Mazda 6 or the Ford Fusion. When it comes to cabin noise, at 50 miles an hour we scored 73 decibels, which makes this a little bit louder than the average entry in this segment, so I'm going to have to give this a B-. Some of the other hybrids especially are quieter than this. The Honda Accord Hybrid and the Ford Fusion Hybrid are a little bit quieter in the cabin than this. However, this hybrid system is still quieter than something like the Toyota Camry. We get an awful lot less motor noise, especially when regenerative braking, than we see in Toyota's hybrid systems. In fact, the only time you can really hear any of that motor whine is when the windows are down and you're on a very smooth road surface. Hybrids are in theory all about fuel economy, and this is an area where the Malibu disappointed me a little bit. We've been averaging about 38 to 39 miles per gallon, even though the EPA says we should be getting around 46. Now obviously I do live in the mountains and I drive on roads like this every day, but most of the other hybrids out there tend to get scores that are very similar to their EPA rating. In our tests, the mid-size sedans from Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai all exceeded their EPA estimates, but the Ford Fusion, very much like the Chevy Malibu, does seem to fall just a little bit behind. At this point, you're probably wondering why I'm giving this a high score, even if it failed to reach the EPA estimates in my tests. The reason for that is, even though we did not get the 46 miles per gallon that were promised in our tests again on my mountainous commute, this still scored better than something like a Toyota Camry Hybrid, and depending on your driving situation, the Hyundai Sonata Hybrid. It may have taken GM a little bit longer than some of the other car companies to bring a full hybrid mainstream mid-size sedan to market. However, the Malibu Hybrid is definitely worth the wait. Although this hybrid system is not one of the most powerful available on the segment, it is certainly one of the smoothest and one of the best integrated all around in this vehicle. I certainly hope this finds its way into other GM vehicles very soon. Last week I was sick, and this week I'm in a hotel room with a giant set of lips right behind my head, but that's not going to distract us from talking about pricing and comparisons. Let's dive right on into the pricing. The Malibu starts at $21,680 for the base L trim. The important thing to keep in mind with the Malibu is that even though this is a brand new Malibu, General Motors has really kept the price just about the same as the previous generation. That means that we get about $1,500 of extra feature content in this base Malibu versus the outgoing Malibu. The other important thing to keep in mind is that the 1.5-liter turbocharged engine is standard. Chevy is not pulling one of the tricks that some manufacturers use by jamming an older engine design in that base model. However, I still think that the realistic base price is one trim level up from the bottom, as we see from most entries in this particular segment, and that would be the LS trim. For that $23,120, we get 16-inch alloy wheels, the backup camera, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, the larger LCD right there in the center of the dashboard. I really think that's where most customers are going to want to start their Malibu. The next step up is the top-end trim for the 1.5-liter turbocharged engine, and this trim allows you to add leather. Now, you do have to pay an extra $2,140 in order to add leather to the 1LT trim, but you can do it. The next trim level up is the hybrid model at $27,770. You'll notice that Chevy is not considering that hybrid model a range topping model, so there are going to be a few options that you cannot get in the hybrid that you can get in the top-end trims. From there we move on into the 2LT trim, which is the first trim with the larger 2-liter turbocharged engine. It gets the 8-speed automatic transmission, and interestingly enough, you cannot get leather in that trim. So while you can get leather in the top-end 1.5-liter turbo that's less expensive, you can't do it in the 2LT. The reason for that, of course, is because the $30,920 Premier trim exists, and that's where you're going to find things like the radar adaptive cruise control, ventilated seats, and up-level leather. General Motors has done an excellent job keeping the MSRP in check. Again, this has about $1,500 more standard equipment than we found in the 2015 model year vehicle. The result of that is that a fully loaded Chevy Malibu undercuts the Fusion, the Chrysler 200, or the Passat by about $2,000. If you take a look at this MSRP chart, you'll notice that the Malibu is not the least expensive hybrid in this segment, even though the base Malibu gasoline model is one of the least expensive in its segment. That's because Chevy has positioned their hybrid a little bit higher up the food chain. When you take a look at the spectrum available in this mid-size sedan hybrid segment, the Fusion is on one far end of this segment, and they have a very basic hybrid model. So if all you're after is an inexpensive mid-sized hybrid sedan, that Fusion is going to be one of the least expensive. At the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the all-new Accord Hybrid, and Honda is really treating that hybrid model as sort of a range-topping model. All of the hybrid Accords come standard with the Honda Sensing Safety Package. That's their all-encompassing system that combines things like lane departure warning, lane departure prevention, road departure mitigation, along with radar adaptive cruise control and pre-collision braking. Fuel economy is, of course, what hybrids are all about, but there is a little bit of a fuel economy wrinkle that we need to discuss. The EPA has changed the way fuel economy numbers are crafted for 2017. In an effort to keep things as fair as possible, all the numbers you're taking a look at are 2017 EPA fuel economy numbers, except for the Malibu Hybrid, because we don't have any 2017 numbers for it yet. So I do have a 2016 number, which is 46 miles per gallon combined, and I have an estimate that it may lose 1 mile per gallon for the 2017 number, bringing it down to 45 miles per gallon. Most of the entries in this segment did lose 1 mile per gallon, going from the 2016 cycle to the 2017 cycle. Whether the Malibu ends up with a 46 or a 45 mile per gallon combined score, it is still one of the most efficient entries in this segment, and it's noticeably more efficient than that Toyota Camry down there at 38 miles per gallon combined. The important thing to remember about the Camry, the Sonata Hybrid, and the Optima Hybrid is that they get relatively narrow tires in their hybrid trims. The Camry, especially in its base hybrid trim, which is actually 2017 rated for 40 miles per gallon, has very skinny tires for the mid-size sedan segment. The XLE and the SE models that are on this chart right here get 38 miles per gallon combined, and I think it's really the better comparison to the other entries in this segment, because the Honda Accord Hybrid, the Ford Fusion Hybrid, and the Chevy Malibu Hybrid all have very wide tires. So when you're taking a look at the hybrid versions of the Malibu, the Fusion, and the Accord, there's actually a very small handling difference between the regular gasoline version of those vehicles and the hybrid version of those vehicles. In fact, some versions of the hybrid Accord will actually handle better than the regular gasoline versions of the Accord. Same goes for the Malibu and the Fusion. But that's not happening over there with the Toyota, the Hyundai, and the Kia. Their hybrid versions will generally handle a little bit worse than the regular gasoline versions. Ford's Fusion Hybrid is one of the most popular entries in this segment, likely because of its very low starting price. The Ford is also one of the most attractive in this segment on the outside. Even though the Fusion is starting to get a little bit old at this time, I still think that the exterior design is simply one of the most attractive. The Ford Fusion also has an excellent handling dynamic, and they've recently refreshed the infotainment system, so we finally get Ford's brand new Sync 3 system. Unfortunately, Sync 3 does not yet support Apple CarPlay and Android Auto like we do see in the Chevy Malibu. The other thing you'll notice when you compare the interiors of the Ford and the Chevy is that although the Ford's exterior has aged very well, the interior is starting to look just a little bit dated. In practical terms, the Malibu has a more usable trunk pass-through, and a more comfortable rear seat, especially for adults. The very sexy side profile that we see in the Ford Fusion really has a severe impact on rear headroom. So if you plan on carrying adults, especially adult people over about 6 feet tall, they're going to be much more comfortable in the Chevy Malibu. If you're simply looking for one of the least expensive hybrids in this segment, the Ford Fusion is definitely going to fit that bill, and there are a decent number of incentives on the hybrid Fusion. Next up, we have the Kia Optima, which requires a little bit of explanation, because for the 2016 model year, they gave us an all-new Optima sedan. However, they were not able to put their all-new hybrid system into that all-new Optima sedan. So instead what they did was they kept the old hybrid model around for an extra model year. So the 2015 Optima Hybrid and the 2016 Optima Hybrid are the same vehicle. The 2016 Optima and the 2017 Optima Hybrid, those will be the new vehicle. The key thing to know here is that we don't know the pricing on the 2017 Optima Hybrid and we haven't driven it yet. But you should expect the 2017 Optima Hybrid to be basically a Kia Optima with the brand new hybrid drivetrain system in it that we have driven in the Hyundai Sonata Hybrid. As far as the 2016 Optima Hybrid goes, it's starting to feel a little bit old. It used the first generation of the Hyundai Kia hybrid system that uses a traditional 6-speed automatic transmission and an electric motor and a clutch pack. It's just not as smooth as the latest Kia Hyundai system or most of the competition in this particular segment. The other reason it's starting to look old is because, of course, the brand new Kia Optima is sitting right there next to it on the dealer lot. Although the 2017 model year's hybrid system is all new, I don't expect it to achieve the same kind of fuel economy numbers that we're seeing out of the Chevy Malibu. If we take a look at the Hyundai Sonata Hybrid, which does use the new system and has been rated for 2017, it's rated for 40 miles per gallon combined, and it's unlikely that the Optima is going to get any higher. Because the Kia Optima and the Hyundai Sonata hybrids share a drivetrain, we've already talked about the basics of the Hyundai Sonata Hybrid. When it comes to pricing, value is very good for the Sonata, but it's not quite as smooth as the hybrid system that we see in the Chevy Malibu. The previous generation of the Sonata had a very adventurous design inside and out, but they've really toned that down for this generation of the Sonata. If you're looking for a very traditionally designed interior, that would actually be the Sonata these days. If you're looking for something that's a little bit more adventurous, that might actually be the Malibu. The Camry has an extremely well-deserved reputation for reliability. Unfortunately, when it comes to value, there's just a little bit of a problem there, because as you noticed before, the Camry is not one of the least expensive entries in this segment, but it also is not one of the most fuel-efficient entries in this segment, so you're paying more for lower fuel economy. The hybrid system is one of the older designs in this segment. It has a very small trunk pass-through because the battery occupies a very large portion of the trunk. The handling also leaves a little bit to be desired, especially compared to the hybrid versions of the Fusion, the Malibu, and the Accord. Speaking of the Accord, I think this really is the Malibu's toughest competitor in this particular segment now that it's come back for the 2017 model year. The all-new Accord's 48 mile per gallon fuel economy rating is class-leading, and it's only about 4 miles per gallon lower than a brand new Toyota Prius. Both General Motors and Honda have doubled down on infotainment, bringing their latest and snazziest infotainment systems to their mid-size sedans. They both offer CarPlay and Android Auto. They both have innovative hybrid systems that are a little bit different than the rest of the systems we see in this particular segment. The one in the Honda Accord is a two-motor system that has a fixed ratio when it's in parallel hybrid mode, and then it operates as a serial hybrid below about 40 miles an hour. That system allows you to drive in EV mode only up to about 70-75 miles an hour very easily and actually engage the EV mode button at those higher speeds. The Chevy Malibu system has an all-new transmission design that's designed to give us excellent fuel economy while building on the system that we see in the Chevy Volt. The two models definitely have different pros and cons. The Accord has a smoother ride and it has more power, but unfortunately there's no trunk pass-through. The Malibu has one of the largest trunk pass-throughs in the hybrid mid-size sedan segment, making it easier to put large and long items into the cargo area. The Malibu's hybrid system is definitely smoother when switching between hybrid modes and EV modes, but it lacks the high-speed EV mode ability that we see in the Accord hybrid. The Accord and the Malibu very nearly tied in this segment, but the Accord has a slight edge because General Motors for some reason has decided to restrict some of the features to the top-end Premier model and not offer them in the hybrid model. You can't get things like the ventilated seats that you find in the Premier model. You also can't get the heated steering wheel or the radar adaptive cruise control system. And Honda treats the Accord hybrid just a little bit differently, as I said earlier. The entire Honda sensing system is actually standard in all models of the hybrid Accord. So all models get things like the radar adaptive cruise control, the pre-collision braking system, lane keeping assistance, road departure mitigation, etc. In addition to that, I found the front seats in the Accord to be a little bit more comfortable than the Malibu, and in terms of performance, the Accord also manages to be about 3/4 of a second faster 0 to 60 than we find in the Chevy. Of course, the extra performance and the extra comfort in the Accord hybrid will cost you because it's going to be a little bit more expensive than the Chevy Malibu, but I think it's worth it. I also think that if Chevy decided to put some of those advanced features that we see in the Premier model down into the hybrid model, it would probably tie with the Accord hybrid. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2016 Chevy Malibu Hybrid. Be sure and click that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. Check out the related videos on the side of your screen, and stay tuned for the full review of the Accord hybrid coming up next week. I'll see you then.